Our next speaker is our chairman, Dr. Tom Burke. Now, Tom is on the spot because now he's going to explain what the initiative is about and how the steering committee is going to go about it. But he brings a very rich background and certainly the qualifications to help steer this activity. He currently holds a Fabricant Professor and Chair of Health Risk and Society at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. He's got a checkered past. Now that doesn't have to do with just Johns Hopkins. He's been a long-standing expert in terms of advising all the way up to the president. He served under President Obama as the EPA Science Advisor and Deputy Assistant Administrator for Research and Development. He comes from New Jersey. He's educated at Pennsylvania. He's got a checkered past. But Tom will explain, not only in terms of what you've heard with our opening speaker, the challenges that they have presented, what they're doing about it, how the steering committee then will launch a new committee, and how the Academy will pick up on this holistic approach, however it's defined. So, Tom, I'll turn it over to you to explain what goes on next.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, I guess it is a checkered past, and I just want to say I'm here to talk about the details. We've had a tremendous consensus building since the beginning of our effort of the importance of a more systems look, to look upstream, to look downstream, to really think of the parts of our system here. And we have some challenges, and so I'd like to try and move us forward by describing the work of the initiative. So how did we get here? The input that we've received, the proposed strategy, and we're just the steering committee. The work's not done yet. There's hard work to do. We have to think about how we move forward. And that's really the purpose of my talk today, that moving forward piece here, through our breakout sessions, through your involvement, how we will do that. We've heard from all the speakers that our environmental problems are changing. Perhaps they've always been complex, but let's face it, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. That really compartmentalized our approach to environmental protection, and we live with that. As a former EPA scientist, we live with that through the statutes, through the program areas. But quite frankly, I can tell you, if you want to have a good postdoc, go to EPA as a science advisor for a couple of years, and you see the system. You see the system working. Whether it's the congressional hearings and the political input, or whether it's the public meetings in Flint with the community members who are on the receiving end of the failure to protect the environment, you see the incredibly complex system there. And so we have really faced problems from energy to climate change to air quality to food production and safety and transportation. And it really comes down to that sustainability that we heard so well about today and how we move forward in this science. And one of the Academy committees that was, again, pretty hard work, but really enjoyable and somewhat frustrating, took on this challenge not too long ago in 2013. And the report is Science for Environmental Protection, the Road Ahead. And we took on the fact that our environmental challenges have really changed and tried to define these wicked problems we face. You heard today of some wicked challenges from our previous speakers. And what does this mean? Well, what we're doing is complex. It's affected by many interacting factors, various spatial scales. As you've heard, there are global implications, but they're difficult to define, socially really complex, and frankly, no one clear solution. And most importantly, I think, for the Academy's work and what we're doing with this initiative, they extend beyond the understanding of one discipline. They require not just the disciplines to come together, but the sectors involved in the system to come together. And I want to go back to, I was health commissioner in New Jersey when this report came out, and I have to say it was a monumental report in the field of public health practice, particularly those who are working on environmental health, because as you've heard, environmental health falls through the cracks. And taking the systems approach, hopefully one of our real goals is to prevent unintended consequences. One unintended consequence of really strengthening the national programs, establishing the EPA, establishing state environmental agency, was the removal of environmental health authority from public health agencies, way back there in the 70s. And so this IOM report of 1988 called that to our attention and talked about something that I think we are still living the legacy of, and that is the unintended fragmentation of our efforts to protect the environment and inadequate attention to the health dimension. So this environmental health initiative is about reconnecting the environment and health connection by taking a look at the bigger system. Now, I'll come back to the details of this, but there was a handout on this. It's not unintentionally, it kind of looks like a target there, but it really is, it's circular. It's not linear. It's inclusive. At the heart of it is health, vulnerable populations, individual health, protecting our communities. And you see the layers of this complex system that all interact really to define our success in protecting the environment. So you go from the environmental health effects, the traditional environmental continuum, through the mediators of health, through the actions, and whether they be public health or the healthcare community or individual risk perception or business practices, through the external drivers. And believe me, they are incredibly important in defining our success, whether it's the political context or financial capacity or public perception, the economy. And then the actors, and we'll talk about that. But hopefully we have many of the actors here in the room today, from researchers to industry and business to advocacy organizations and the policy world. Now, I was heartened by the previous three speakers and the tremendous progress that is going on, despite perhaps a perception that there's so many challenges in environmental health. You've heard from Unilever, and there are many businesses that are also doing great things, looking at innovation and the green side of innovation, and really stepping forward to reduce the hazardous chemicals in consumer products. And one thing that I want to talk about, again, another Academy report. You'll see there's a little bit of an advertisement for the good work of the Academy, but we're building on the scientific foundations here. And that is the rise of health impact assessment as an inclusive way to guide policy choices. And there you have the cover of the Improving Health in the United States, the role of health impact assessment. A lot of the thinking, the systems thinking that has gone into the deliberations of this initiative was really influenced by the health impact assessment. So, we're sitting in the national academies. We've heard from the presidents of each of the academies. The National Academy, established by Abe Lincoln, I still remember how nervous I was at my first Academy meeting a long time ago, sitting under the portrait of Abe Lincoln and thinking about the incredible responsibility to serve with the Academy to address the nation's major environmental problems. So I don't have Abe Lincoln himself here, but there's his photograph here. And we have a strong history, a convening power, and a tremendous opportunity to build upon and harness the tremendous reach and influence of the National Academy of Sciences. And just to show you, there's even those of us who've worked extensively at the Academy probably haven't worked across the full range of disciplines and boards and divisions. But I think it's important to see just how far the reach is, from health and medicine at the National Academy of Medicine, through the National Academies of Science, and engineering and physical sciences, and that's what it's going to take. There's also a strong history in environmental health. There's that wonderful Science and Decisions book. That's an inside joke. Thank you, students. But also across the board of social sciences, of medicine, there is a strong history of really blazing the path that we've taken as a nation in environmental health. So as we began our work, we cast a broad net. Today's part of that broad net, and probably many of you heard about this meeting through the efforts of the Academy to reach out to thought leaders, to major organizations, and to individuals through the internet to increase awareness. And we asked about important topics. What did we hear about? Well, we're hearing about them even more today, and hopefully that will be part of our breakout sessions. But just to give you a flavor of the kind of things people are concerned about, clearly climate change and the health connection to climate change, the very challenging issue of the cumulative and aggregate exposures to multiple chemicals and their health effects, mixtures, air quality, water in all its glory and all its challenges, whether it be water quality, water supply, or the water infrastructure for the U.S., definitely came to the fore. Energy, whether it be hydraulic fracturing and the new technologies related to that are advancing the energy capabilities of the country, at the same time challenged by many for their impacts on the environment, alternative energy development, and non-carbon energy sources. Transportation. Now, there's one thing you learn about 2 nanoseconds after becoming a federal appointee, and that is there's this command to stay in your lane. And it's interesting because it's kind of what you learn in driver's ed too. But we've had lanes that have probably kept systems thinking out of working together on the full range of transportation challenges. And Dick Jackson sent me an email last night, and Dick, I hope you're out there on the web. But he talked about his experience when he meets with groups and talks about the worst part of their day. What was the worst part of the day? And it's the commute. It's transportation. It's getting around. Clearly, it's not just the misery of the commute, but it's also the incredible contribution to air quality and climate that transportation makes. So, and then food. The old bugaboo that we thought we made progress on, that Flint reawakened us to, that new toxicology and new studies, as you saw from Bruce Lampier, really show us the need to continue to work on those persistent problems. Clearly, health disparities and environmental justice. And for those of us who worked on the front lines in addressing Zika and saw the really tough challenges of, do you spray? Do you introduce neurological toxicity in another way by trying to prevent the neurological endpoints of a dreaded disease? And so we heard a broad range of topics. Those are some examples. We continue to reach out. But we also heard, most importantly, in our first meeting especially, listen. Involve different groups. Develop solutions, not just in the hallowed halls of the Academy among the science elite, but by reaching out and bringing groups together. Grounded information, state, local, and federal government interaction. Listen to local groups and partner with our national organizations, our agency scientists, our public health organizations, and again, the local community level. And so the vision emerged. It's always tough to put pen to paper and come up with a vision, but I'd like to read that to you. The vision of the Environmental Health Matters Initiative is to transform how the nation addresses the complex interplay of environmental factors affecting human health, to reduce the burden of disease and disability due to environmental factors, and to promote human health and healthy communities. And the mission will enable various sectors to harness and mobilize cross-sector and transdisciplinary knowledge and strategies that take into account this holistic view of interacting factors to address the complex environmental health challenges. So, getting down into the detail and the process, how do you really do this? Well, goal one is to explore the complexity of challenges, problem definition. How do we define this thing and what's necessary to address them? Identify opportunities for progress. I was taken by Jack's talking of the sustainability assessment that was done for various product lines and brands. We need to do the same kind of thing. Look at opportunities for environmental health progress. Advance the development of holistic and sustainable solutions. And frankly, we heard one of the presidents of the academies talk about the federal government is probably not going to become nimble overnight. But let me just say, the academy needs to become more nimble too, and that's part of the transition you're seeing at the academy to provide more rapid expert input when appropriate. Because I can tell you, on the front lines of environmental challenges, sometimes you can't wait for a 3-year consensus study. So what's the strategy? Focus on significant issues where you can make a difference. Facilitate understanding of the complexity. Define the complexity, how it fits within the system. Identify needs and opportunities. Identify how different sectors and actors contribute, the role of the different sectors. I can't tell you how many, I probably could count them, but it's a big number, how many environmental issues I've been involved in that were defined by one molecule, one pathway. Whether it be 2378-TCDD, a certain Arachlor or PCBs, or a certain fluorinated molecule when there are literally thousands of like molecules. We really need to see what opportunities we have and how we can catalyze the generation of these new ideas to move more swiftly. We also want to identify the big issues to tackle. And that's a big part of today. They'll be selected with broad input, with human health impacts right there at the top. Significant scale, complexity, and also, as you've seen, I liked very much Rich's pyramid of really the strength of the science as we go and we look at environmental health challenges. We're not just going to take those well-known. So lead, some would say lead has been very well studied. Others would say we're just beginning to really understand the low-dose effects and the effects on other age groups. But we want to look at various levels of the maturity of the science. And so you heard from our last questioner the request to really think about electromagnetic fields in a new way. So some ideas that were mentioned in this outreach of literally hundreds of people throughout our field: transportation, persistent compounds, health implications of industrial agricultural practices, the water infrastructure, climate change impacts on health, and yes, childhood lead exposures, and I'd like to add to that, as an old man, lifetime lead exposures and effects across the lifetime. So how do you do this? The Academy, after all, is really has a model of consensus studies and committees. Well, there will be a core committee. We're just the start. One thing I learned working with 9 people, there's a certain benefit to having larger committees and broader representation. It's been a lot of work, but there'll be a core committee of multiple disciplines, and you can see the range there across the science. And I want to emphasize behavioral scientists, social scientists are scientists, and really a big part of that. Believe me, I knew a lot about water chemistry when I went to Flint. I don't think I was prepared for the social science challenges of those public meetings with the people of Flint, as well prepared as we could be if we redefine our approaches. There will be coordinating group liaisons, and you've seen the liaisons. There's been tremendous support from Jennifer and Patrick and Linda in really defining the direction here. And we want to invite multiple sectors, the business sector, as you've heard, the agencies, but also state and local agencies, the medical community, and foundations to be part of the group through the liaison process. And then, of course, knowing the complexity of the issues, we will have topic-specific participants. And one thing that's also important, we're sitting here at the National Academies. I never understood just how difficult it is to have a conversation across sectors until I wore the mantle of EPA. And I wanted to learn about hydrofracking in an honest scientist-to-scientist conversation. But it really became very difficult. How do you convene folks? How do you get that neutral corner? Well, that's the Academy. That's what the Academy offers, I think, by working with the initiative, where different sectors can come here and actors can contribute without the challenge and frankly, defensiveness that you see when regulators meet with regulated communities, or when regulators who are being challenged by communities because of environmental problems meet and immediately the battle lines are drawn. So each topic will ask key questions. What are the scientific questions? What interventions are in place now and what more is needed? What are the opportunities for innovation? Let's face it, another aspect of our environmental infrastructure in many ways, and I say this as a regulator both at the federal and state level, are against innovation. We have to be open to opportunities for innovation. This initiative can push that forward. And what are the barriers? Why are we really not moving ahead? What are the scientific barriers, whether they be lack of data, but what are the other social, political, economic, financial barriers, and can we identify them so that we can lead to solutions? So I'd like to go back to maybe problem formulation, but really understanding the landscape of this really complex system of environmental health. I think through the lens of this approach, and there's accompanying materials, strategic planning materials on kind of a matrix to guide the consideration and definition of a problem. But here you see really our need to move beyond our narrow, sometimes mandated statutory view, sometimes molecular view, sometimes medium-specific view, to the people of concern, the people of high risk. It's our ultimate goal, the public health goal, particularly of the Environmental Health Matters Initiative. The environmental health assessment, the drivers from source, actually before source, life cycle assessment and understanding of development through exposure to dose, to health effects, to population impacts. We need to understand the mediators of health, whether that be the socioeconomic status within a community, the limits of technology, the medical community, the public health initiatives, or even individual acceptance of the challenge. We need to identify the action steps and therefore the things that can be done. And they're not all regulatory. In fact, it's a very small part of the universe when you think about it. When you think about the hazardous universe out there and the number of substances, for instance, that we actually effectively regulate. And so how do we think about this in a different way? And what are the right kind of actions? We heard about advocacy. Clearly, as an academic, I'm going to talk about the need for research, but we need to bring the business community and the medical community together as well. The external drivers have to be kind of a part of the thought process, as well as the actors. Who can do what? How can we work together on this? And then clearly, how the Academy, through its vast resources and boards, can really serve the nation. There's lots of tools. You've heard about the consensus studies. Those are the traditional things. They have their own issues. Many of them go through for multiple rounds. I've been a part of some very challenging studies, and we know that we continue to be challenged by some very tough and persistent pollutants. I can name them. We probably all have a favorite. Being from New Jersey, mine is Chrome-6, but they're the chlorinated solvents. There's a full list of them where there's scientific debate, but there's also many other factors that have been driving our decision-making on that. We can have workshops, conferences and symposia, roundtables, forums, and standing committees. And there's other, perhaps less familiar tools. I found it was very important to have rapid turnaround, to convene smart people really quickly, to think through a problem, maybe to ask the right questions at the beginning. I wish we could have done that in so many different ways in some of the challenges that continue to face EPA and the states that are so important to environmental quality. There can also be fast-track studies on focused topics and expert meetings. And so the Environmental Health Matters Initiative will serve a really important function of setting the stage, doing in a sense the problem formulation, and working with the Academy to really use the full toolbox of opportunities. So what is success here? Well, maybe I'm a dreamer. Wasn't that John Lennon? You may call me a dreamer, but that's okay. Because I actually think there's a lot of folks in this room that realize the time has come. It is time to change the way we do business and develop a new lens from the beginning through the problem-solving aspects of environmental health. A new lens for environmental health. Inclusion, perspectives from the different scientific disciplines. Cross-sector perspectives. How often do we really sit down and share scientific information, share information that's so important to the environmental health system? A more solid understanding of that relationship between the environment and human health. Clearly, we've seen dramatic data on the tremendous impacts of the environment on human health. But you cannot have a healthy community without a healthy environment. We'll come up with novel solutions, promote innovation, look at the new tools that are emerging, and hopefully facilitate their application to problem solving. And most importantly, just getting back to Abe Lincoln, we'll be working on the nation's most challenging scientific questions and hopefully providing new ways to answer them. So where are we now? This is a young initiative, but I have to tell you there's been lots of folks in the field who've been thinking about systems approach and thinking across barriers and health impact assessment and innovation and new ways to move the field forward. But here at the Academy, just last winter, the steering committee was appointed, and we've been very, very busy under tremendous involvement of staff here and the leadership of Marilee Shelton Davenport. It's just been a tremendously challenging work, but we are here now. Okay. Now, as we go to the summer, you can see the blue arrow. We're here to have this presentation, to have kind of an open thought process and to refine the strategy. We really hope by the fall to have the full committee appointed, to expand the liaison coordination group, and to begin the selection of initial topics and begin work on those initial topics in the winter. So I might also add, as we move forward, we've had tremendous support, particularly from NIEHS, CDC, and EPA. But this initiative needs to have liaison membership and broad-based support. And so there are opportunities for inclusion in the support as well. So the core activity continues. We'd like feedback on the plan, suggestions of leaders and sectors to serve on committee or liaison groups and suggest topics for topic focus meetings. Would like to hear your input on specific issues and challenges, suggestions for other people, sectors, and groups to involve, and your participation, obviously, in developing those opportunity maps, sitting down with that fancy-looking target and seeing how we redefine our approaches. So I want to end really by saying this is not new. If you want to read a great book, read The Invention of Nature by Andrea Wolff, which is really the story of Alexander von Humboldt. And all of us have kind of heard of Humboldt's current off the California coast and wait for the gray whales to come by. But I'd like to quote Humboldt. In this great chain of causes and effects, Humboldt said, no single fact can be considered in isolation. With this insight, he invented the web of life, the concept of nature as we know it today. Somehow we've gotten away from that in our quest for acceptable risks and bright lines. I think it's time, through the Environmental Health Matters Initiative, really to go back to our very roots of hundreds of years ago, to rethink the connection between environmental health, the interconnection of the various components of the environmental health system, and solve problems better. So I'll stop there, and we'll have some time for questions, Jim.
Hi, my name's Kevin Modis. I'm with the California Brain Tumor Association, Keep Healthy Families at Gmail. I really appreciate your comments. I'm systems trained, and your perspective is the perspective we need to apply to these problems for sure. My question is regarding academia. What do you do when industry has such influence over academia and how we look at environmental problems? In our case, they minimize the issue by saying there's non-ionizing and ionizing radiation, which is an arbitrary division because we know there's health effects all along the spectrum. They also say, well, there's a division between thermal and non-thermal effects, and our NTP study proved that doesn't matter either. And then they put forward the idea of weight of evidence. Oh, well, the studies that we've funded don't show the same effects as the studies that are funded by a public source. And so therefore we shouldn't move forward, we shouldn't look at this issue, and we shouldn't protect. What do you do when industry has such influence over the dialogue and even the look at the issue when such tremendous consequences for not doing it? Because this is basically a high-tech, invisible form of air smog with the same kind of consequences we have from other types of air smog. I look forward to your answer.
Thanks for the question, Kevin. And clearly, scientific transparency, the use of evidence, that the challenges that we see nationally now. I'm an epidemiologist. The challenges to the use of human data in some of the major tough environmental decisions are things that are inbounds, that are going to be part of the discussions, that will be drivers in the transparency of the science and the ethics of science. We have a major challenge that you've identified, and that is industry-sponsored science, academia, independence, and transparency being a real challenge today, because we have all seen the hired gun effect, the delay game, and the kinds of potential abuses of science as an excuse for delay. So I appreciate your question, and it will be on the table. Hi.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for the great introduction to the initiative. You alluded to this at some point towards the end of your talk. Oh, by the way, Jennifer McPartland from Environmental Defense Fund. But in addition to problem formulation and an articulation of opportunity maps, what do you think the role of the academies might be in terms of implementation of some of those solutions that are articulated in the opportunity maps, and also in terms of tracking progress and measuring success?
Great question. So when you stimulate science and you start a new way of thinking, how do you get it to be implemented? As anyone who's ever been on an NAS committee As you do those briefings, and when the report is finished and you brief the White House and the various agencies, your biggest dread is that report's going to sit on a shelf somewhere and not be implemented. I can speak for Science of Decisions or the Mercury Report or any number of reports. This will be different. It will be different because of inclusion. It will be different because of active involvement by the agencies, by the implementation. The entire goal of this is not science for science sake, but science for decisions and science for implementation. And we realize that's tough. Many people can go their entire career, even in environmental health, reading very few Academy reports. But we want to make sure, just as much as we work on the science and the research aspects of this, we work on the translation and implementation. Thanks for the question.
Because we have time constraints, but I'd like to ask of each of you who are lined up, formulate a very succinct question. We'll take note of it, and then we'll make sure it gets brought up during this afternoon's discussion. So if you give us a quick question, we'll let Tom hold off on the answer.
I promise I'll do quick answers.
Okay, if you can.
Not.
We can postpone lunch for a little bit of time.
Okay.
So Dan Greenbaum from the Health
Hey, Dan.
Effects Institute, and great to have this initiative going. Kudos to the steering committee for getting it up and running and moving forward with it. And your talk was so clear on exactly the very detailed, every little piece that you already have figured out. No, you haven't, but that's fine. It's great to have everybody moving
Thank you,
on this,
Marilee.
and it's really working very importantly. I particularly like this tension and a useful tension between short-term. Can there be faster turnaround on some things, maintaining quality, a la the IRIS review that recently
Yes.
was done, for example, versus the consensus studies, and the longer-term contributions were important. One challenge that I want to raise, and I'm sure I know you sort of alluded to it in your closing. Those of us who've sat on the boards and other stuff, not just the consensus committees, know that we've tried strategically, historically, let's do studies on this topic or these important topics, et cetera. And the question always came down to, where's the money going to come from? Who's going to fund this? And you've probably started to think about that. Two things: is there a way to sort of get a base level of funding for the operations of this core committee, et cetera, that could allow that sort of strategic, much more detailed stuff? And then the second, one thing I didn't see mentioned there, and I think it needs to be thought through as part of this, is Congress. Congress has been the source of much of the funding that has come ultimately to, sometimes in positive ways, sometimes in negative ways, but I think that needs to be part of the strategic thinking. Who are the friends there? Who's thinking about science, et cetera? Because that may well be a key avenue for keeping this thing moving forward. So those are my
Dan, thanks for your great insights, and thanks for being here today. You have struggled in this vineyard, and we're going to be drawing upon your wisdom to help us with that. Clearly, Congress is there in the system, a huge driver right now, from funding to the statutes, and so we hear you. Lynn.
Hey, Tom.
Hi, Lynn.
Thank you very much for that overview, and actually to the committee for having made so much progress on this. It's very exciting. There were a couple of questions I want to briefly put on the table, and one has to do with, and I think it's a very important element of this, and that is that there's really kind of a lack of common understanding of environmental science, and it becomes very quickly politicized over what the solutions are going to be and the regulations are going to be and what the laws are going to be. And that, unfortunately, the understanding of what's actually going on in the environment and going on with health gets often lost, in the process. I think that's a very important role of this effort. And I don't mean risk communication.
Right.
I mean, environmental science understanding. The second question or point that I wanted to put on the table, I really was delighted that at the end you talked about the importance of the natural environment, because I think that is all too often lost. And in another effort that has been done here at the Academies Roundtable on Environmental Health Sciences, a long time ago, because I was on it at the time, identified the natural, the built, and the social environment as important components. And environmental health tends to go to the things we build and make and how those might be damaging our bodies without well enough understanding how what we're doing to the natural environment impacts our health, as well as critical role of social and behavioral sciences. And you mentioned the Silver Book, and that, one of their conclusions was that cumulative risk needs to factor in things beyond, just substances, but getting the ability to research on that, to develop that, the scholarship of that is very difficult. And I think that this effort could really help with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And I just want to mention, you mentioned cumulative risk and understanding the societal context of that risk. And I want to give a shout out to the efforts underway. And Lauren Zeiss is here. California is taking this bull by the horns and trying to look at the Silver Book and think about the other factors that define risk, that define vulnerability, so that we can make better decisions about environmental protection.
Hi, thank you for that talk. I'm Christy Pullen-Fedenik at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and I was actually going to talk on a similar topic. So the concentric circle diagram that you showed that, had kind of separations between the different, areas that contribute to environmental health. One of the things that I find myself grappling with, and I think would be useful to have the Academy think about a bit as well, is the fluidity between those layers and those levels. And so, during your talk, you mentioned environmental factors in particular, and, how we define an environmental factor. Is it possible to, if we're going to think about air pollution as the impetus of a study, but also thinking about poverty, also thinking about lack of access to, healthy foods as also being the starting point of a study as well. And so to make sure that we're including the social and behavioral sciences, not necessarily or exclusively, in a lot of ways, I think it's happened as transactional relationships within this space, where we bring in social scientists to inform how we're thinking about environmental health, rather than having community groups and folks that work outside of what's traditionally considered environmental health shape and start a study. Yeah. So that way we can start to get at the fluidity that exists between all of those different levels.
Fantastic. And one thing I didn't point out, these levels are not compartmentalizing. They're interactive. It's so busy, I didn't know how to describe this. But clearly, this kind of slide I would tell my doctoral students not to include. But this is the Academy, so what the heck. But clearly, it's not, I take issue with Paracelsus. It's not just the dose that makes the poison. It's the social context of the population. It's the vulnerability of that population socially, nutritionally, biologically, and financially. And we have to define the issues better.
Oh, just a comment. Quick comment.
Hi. My name is Pamela Bingham. I did not find this meeting from any conventional source. I Googled and it came up.
Great.
No, not great. Because I should have known, and there are other people I know who should have known.
Yes.
So communication is an issue. I'm with Howard University, the National Society of Black Engineers, and the American Society of Civil Engineers. So professionally, I come at this from a lot of different levels. The engineering side, I'm currently actually in an environmental studies department at Howard. But personally, I've lived this my entire life. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, in a neighborhood I learned in 1992 was a cancer cluster from a lecture by Bob Bullard. We thought childhood leukemia was normal as we buried all of our friends. So when I try to translate what I know and what I have to explain to my Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Deep South family, it really comes down to two basic issues. We may know a lot in the environmental health arena. We may have solutions, but if it doesn't trickle down to state and local, if it's a nice report or if it's a federal initiative, but state and local don't have the resources, people are dying. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking about all the people I know in all of these concentric circles, as well as the job that I have to do. I have to translate this. I have to be a trusted messenger in the communities that I work. I'm already concerned that the communities in which I work are overrepresented on the research side. They are the people being researched, but not overrepresented in this room. And we've got to do better. So when we talk about risk in the public health, environmental health sense, that's a different risk than at state and local where people are uninsured, or the state of Virginia didn't do Medicaid expansion, and so people don't have anything. That is my biggest concern about whatever we determine, is that it be realistic and that we figure out, how to make it place relative. The Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies did Place Matters a few years ago. Some of those people should probably be here. We know about the zip code studies. We've all seen that. So it's not just the science, it's how it's, actually applied on the ground. And the last thing, on a personal note, I'm taking 17 Girl Scouts to Belize next week. Can we talk offline about Zika?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for your very important comments, and I want to assure you the message has been received. Thank you.
Just a very short comment, and I think it fits well with that last comment. Is there any way that I could persuade you to break up the siloization of the discussion groups? Given how we've been interacting throughout this meeting, I'm actually appalled that we're now about to separate into our little constituencies.
Well, I'm not sure if we can change the organization of the meeting, but it was not meant to be that at all. We will reconvene. Hopefully we will have diversity within the breakout groups as well. And so I also hear on that. Believe it or not, we had a rather lengthy debate about just this topic, about if we rarely get to hear, say, from the business sector and their primary concerns, but we never get to hear about multiple sectors talking together and integrating it. So we will attempt after the breakout groups to try and synthesize by hearing from each of the groups. We couldn't go another day to do what you're saying, Ellen, but you're absolutely right. We hope that people will be cross-cutting, not be afraid. We are in the safe haven of the National Academy and move across sectors in the discussions. Thanks.